welcome to the living room, the place where we listen, learn, and live together. I'm so glad that you've chosen to hang out with us today. I hope you're doing well, and that as a result of our time spent together, your life will be better, and that you'll be more committed to grow, becoming the best version of yourself that you can be. I've got a special guest with me today. She's a dear friend of mine. She's a graduate of Mount Holyoke College with a bachelor's in English and Women's Studies, a graduate of Harvard University's Divinity School with a master's in divinity, and she is currently pursuing the Doctor of Ministry and Transformational Leadership from Boston University's School of Theology. Our special guest is a United Church of Christ pastor who has served churches and hospices. And over the past 2 decades of yoga practice and ministry, she has been gifted with flexibility in many forms, improvisational skills, a colorful interior life, and a fascinating archive of stories. I'm excited about that. I hope some of these stories will emerge. Today's special guest is Pastor Julie Cedrone. Julie, welcome to the living room.
Thank you so much, Richard. I'm delighted to be here in the house with you and looking forward to our conversation. Thank you.
Thank you so much for consenting. I too am delighted to have you in the living room, and I'm looking forward to our conversation. Julie and I are trekking together with several other amazing leaders through, some would say, the upside, the rough side of the mountain. We are trekking through this Doctor of Ministry program in transformational leadership at Boston University, and this is how we met. And since our time together began, man, it's been just about over a year ago now.
Yeah.
I've had the chance to hear more about Julie's life and work and her passion areas in ministry, and I thought it would be an excellent opportunity to have a conversation in the living room just to explore a bit about what she does. Fun fact, when I arrived in Boston to begin the Doctor of Ministry, that was actually my first time in Boston proper. Prior to that, I'd only been in the airport on a layover. So saw out of the windows, hadn't been in Boston. So when I was accepted into the program, traveled there in July of 2019, that was my first time in Boston. And it was my first time learning about the close proximity of a lot of universities, MIT, Harvard, Boston, and several others. So I didn't know that BU was actually close to Harvard. So once Julie figured that out, and that number of us were runners, as well as herself, she said, let's run to Harvard. And for whatever reason, I've always had this kind of distant affection for Harvard. So I was all in. And so I want to begin this episode by saying thank you for introducing me to the Ivy League by way of running the streets of Boston from BU past MIT to Harvard. And that was an awesome, memorable experience. And so I think we should begin there. You run.
Mm-hmm.
And when did you get into running, and why do you run?
I've been running since about 9th grade, mostly distance runs, not sprints. And my reasons for running have changed pretty dramatically. I think it began because I just loved endurance sports. I like being outside. I like being on cross-country teams. I love the challenge. Now, as a pastor, I work out all the problems of the world while I'm running, and I write all of my sermons while I'm running. So I think I look like a maniac talking to myself, running all over the streets. I just sort of mumble, and then I get home and I get to my laptop and I write down everything that I've thought about. Because I'm the kind of person that thinks really well while I am in motion. I've heard that Bill Gates brings a little trampoline with him everywhere, that he likes to jump as he thinks. I need to run as I think. So that's what I do. I run and figure out major problems.
You know, I can relate to that a lot of my thinking really does, I believe, grow and mature while I'm in motion, whether it is literally something as domestic as washing dishes. If I'm washing dishes, you'd be surprised at the depth of thought that I'm in, but also running and bike riding. So that's awesome. Activity is kind of a theme of your life. In your bio, I didn't know this, that not only are you a practitioner of yoga, but that you're actually an instructor of yoga. Is that in the same kind of category of movement connected to mind for you?
Yeah, I mean, I'm fascinated with the mind-body connection as a whole, and that's what I love about yoga. I think of it as one big body prayer. So the yoga classes that I teach, and you could tune in Sunday at 4 to Julie's Gentle Flow, are it's a spiritual way of using your body to be connected to the community in the room, to be connected to whatever you find holy, to connect to yourself, and to connect to your breath. I love the fact that the word breath in Hebrew is the same as the word for spirit, right? Our breath is what gives us life. And the heart of yoga is connecting to your breathing and learning to master and control your breathing. Because when everything else falls apart, you have your breath. And if you know how to have a relationship with your breath, you can get yourself really excited or you can calm down. And that's a tool that each one of us has, and it's free. And once we learn how to use that, we have a lot of power over our emotions and how we impact other people in our life.
Speaking of the value and the gift of breath and breath control, how it connects with, to a great degree, life control and emotional control, this pandemic has been a challenge for breathing. Not only the actual details of the coronavirus, but beyond that, just the stress and the uncertainty that has come with it. It has impacted the entire world. And I know that a lot of what you do, when we first met, I don't know if you remember in that icebreaker session at BU, we had to go around in groups of 2 and 3 and just share where you're from, what you do. That's when I learned that you are a pastor and also a hospice chaplain. Mm-hmm. So you attend to people in a very intimate season of their lives. You attend to the dying, the families of the deceased and the dying. And so during a pandemic, I'm sure that that caused agitation in the arena of what you do and how you do it. How have you managed to control your own breath? That is the escalated heartbeat that comes with the stress of trying to help people in this critical hour of their lives, coupled with the fact that we're in a pandemic. Explore that with us. How has it been for you since the early portions of 2020 up until this moment, trying to reconcile those two?
Wonderful question, Richard. The first thing that comes in my mind is when the pandemic began in March and around the Easter season, there is a scripture that I kept returning to, which is actually after the resurrection. Jesus comes back to the disciples and he breathes on them and he breathes the Holy Spirit on them. And I kept thinking, what do we do with that in a pandemic? Because everybody's afraid of breathing and everybody's wearing a mask. But Jesus does this, and it's through his breath that they know he's real, and it's through his breath that they receive that spirit. So on a very deep level, I'm not afraid of this pandemic. I'm not afraid of breathing. I want to keep breathing, and I have to find places to do it. How to provide pastoral care with people at this time is a whole different story, because so much of hospice is about breath and this very sensitive, slow, nuanced, watching people take their last breaths. And if you've ever been with somebody when they're dying, there might be days or weeks where the breath is changing. Sometimes it's fast, kind of like panting, and other times it slows down, and there could be as long as a minute gap in between breaths. Breathing works itself out in all these ways as somebody is laboring and being ushered towards their dying. So how to pay attention to that breath and still stay breathing yourself and help somebody die at the pandemic is hugely challenging. And for all of us hospice clinicians, it was really a crisis, especially in the beginning when we weren't sure what to do or when to wear a mask or when not to wear a mask. So I have visited COVID positive patients and worn the goggles and the face shield and the N95 mask and the hairnet and the gown and look a little bit like a space alien. And it's very hard to have that intimacy with somebody when you have so many physical barriers. But what I've been told is people still feel your touch, even if you're wearing gloves. People still feel your love. People still hear your prayers. Might be a little nasally with one of those masks on. But the spirit, I have to believe that the spirit transcends and gets through all those physical barriers and is still there. And so much of helping people die is just breathing with them and sort of coaching them through it and helping them stay calm. And so being with somebody, even if you have all the protective stuff on, but still holding them and talking to them and praying with them still allows them that feeling of being embraced by your calm breath and by your prayers. Do I do this perfectly? No, it's hard, especially in the early days of the pandemic when we still didn't understand it, but we had all these thoughts like, did I touch that doorknob? Or what about that family member who opened the door and just hugged me automatically? Because that's what we do as human beings. We hug, we embrace, we touch. And what has been so challenging about this pandemic is that many of the things that we understand as being human and as connecting us to one another, we can't do. But sometimes we forget and we do them anyways, and we just have to trust that it's okay. So, I mean, maybe you can interrupt me now, but I guess in answer to your question, breathing safely with people, remembering to stay calm, and remembering that being anxious and being afraid isn't going to help anybody in this pandemic. The best thing I can do as a pastor and a human being is to be healthy, remember that God is holding me, to breathe in a calm way and just move through it and keep my psycho-spiritual shield with me as well as my mask and keep doing that work. Panic is not generally a helpful emotion. It's a lot of wasted energy. So I'm just gonna let it go and do my work as best as I can and do what I can to be safe so I can be present to others who have a lot of fear.
I want to go back just so that we can maybe provide an opportunity for you to compare for us. And I appreciate that you can, by personal experience, affirm the fact that things have definitely been changed. There have been challenges that we've had to work through and are still working through, especially as hospice clinicians. But make us sensitive to what it was like for you before the pandemic entered the global stage, the global scene. How did you get into or sense a call to hospice care, being a hospice clinician, and what were your ways of attending to your patients before the pandemic?
I've been called to the landscape of death and dying since I was a child. And I was thinking about this recently because somebody asked me why I was so comfortable with death and why I had a belief that I would die young, much younger than I am now. I never thought I would live to be in my 40s. And I think it's because somebody told me in a Sunday school context, quite innocently, that when children die, they become angels. And when adults die, they go to some sort of heavenly space. And somebody just sort of threw out this comment, but I attached onto that. And I love this idea of dying as a child and becoming an angel, and I wanted that. And I just always thought that I would die young. When I was in college, I discovered the work of Stephen Levine. He wrote a book called A Year to Live. And the whole concept of that book is when people are on hospice, they often have a spiritual renaissance because their life has a timestamp. And a doctor says, all right, it looks like you have 6 months or less. And because there's an urgency to life, people live really well. They're like, oh, all right, I will play the violin and I will get in that last trip to Italy. And I will forgive my brother who I haven't spoken to in 20 years. People do all that work that they have been putting off for so long, and they live very fully. And we don't need to be on hospice in order to live fully. So the experiment of that book is to imagine your life in shorter spans. So if you were going to die in August of 2021, what would be different about your life? What would you do? What would you not do? What thoughts would you hold on to? And what petty things would you just let go of? And if you live like that spiritually all the time, the result is a life that is really rich and full. So I've been trying to live this way for 20 plus years. A lot of hospice people live this way. We actually joke that we tend to go overboard because you might be going on a hike or something and you think, what if this is the last day I'm alive? I've got to love every second of it.
Right.
Sometimes it gives you a little more pressure, but overall, it gives you a perspective where everything is beautiful and everything is really full, and you don't postpone or procrastinate, because this is it. Life is fragile. We're here. Let's seize it.
I can imagine that not everyone whom you've attended to have embraced that in that way. I'm sure you have experienced and encountered an assortment of emotional responses. What have some of those emotions been that you've encountered? What questions have people been raising while they are dying? What conversations have they wanted to have or avoided?
Mm-hmm. A couple different directions there. There are certainly people who don't want to talk about death or even acknowledge that they're dying. And maybe their family doesn't either. Sometimes I would get to somebody's door and they'd say, take off your name badge. You're not allowed to use the word death here. And for that patient and that family, their denial is almost, maybe their denial is healthy, or their denial is their form of hope. And even though they're bedbound and they're not eating anything, they still want to plan that trip to Mexico, because that vision and that dream is what is getting them through the next hour.
Wow.
So there is this group of people that works with death by working around it and still having their dream, because they don't want anybody to take that away. And it's not my place to do that. For sure, there are definitely plenty of people who are angry. They're angry that they're dying. They're angry that they didn't do everything in their life that they wanted to. They're angry that they don't have time. They're angry at the way they treated people, and they don't know how to remedy it, and they get very stuck. And when somebody is spiritually stuck, their body shows the signs of that. Right? Those people tend to be tighter. They tend to have more pain. They grip, they hold on, and their passing can be much more challenging because they're holding on to so much emotional and spiritual tension, and that is shown in their body, and their body can't release. So I've definitely had patients who have had incredible amount of anxiety and restlessness, and our medical director said to me once, there are plenty of things that a pill cannot fix. Spiritual anguish is not able to be treated with a pill.
Wow.
So you have to kind of get to the issue and sort of massage it out and talk about it and cry and work with those people until they get to different layers of their pain and they're able to let go a little bit more and a little bit more.
What about some of the more, I don't know if this is the correct term, hopeful expressions? Have you been with persons who even you might have just been so surprised, maybe even blessed and inspired by how they dealt with that space, young or old? I'm sure you've come in contact with persons who they were grateful, they were hopeful, they were at peace. What was that like?
Yeah, there are some people who have been able to talk about their death very openly, make concrete goals, and reach them all. I'm thinking about a woman who was about 50 years old who had breast cancer, and her goal was to write letters to her grandchildren who were yet to be born. She had 2 sons. They weren't even married. You know, she didn't know what would happen in their life,
Sure.
but she wrote letters to grandbabies. She wrote letters to her sons on their wedding day. And I mean, neither of them even had a candidate to be married to, but she envisioned all of the future milestones that would happen that she wanted to be at. And she wrote letters for all of them. And she wrote them all, and she completed those letters, and then she was able to let go. I think of another woman who's probably in her late 70s who loved Christmas, loved Christmas. And it was last summer, and she was declining, but she did not want to die until she made sure everybody had a Christmas present. Wow. And she knitted things, she crocheted Afghans, and she made sure everyone had a Christmas present packaged and labeled, and then she let go. Wow. So there's definitely, and not always, and not for everyone, but for many people, there's a relationship between their purpose and completing their purpose and their ability to let go and die peacefully on their own terms.
Yeah, I heard you once mention that to us. You said that many people die in January because they say, I just want to make it past Christmas. Do you think that there is a connection between hope and desire and the extension of life, even if it's not a long extension, but just a few weeks, a few years? Have you seen that at work, in your work in the hospice arena, that, man, when people have a purpose, when there's something they're desiring or looking forward to, whether it's I'm just waiting for my loved one to travel across the country to be here, or I want the birthday to come. Have you seen that at work?
Absolutely. I mean, the Christmas one is very common. It is true. Many people die in early January. Martin Luther King weekend, I just plan on that being all funerals. People
Wow.
want to live through Christmas. And if they have a will, often, but not always, they do. I worked with a man this spring, and his goal was to live until his wedding anniversary. And he got there, and he was really declining, but I was there. I came with the hospice nurse, and he wasn't well enough to be able to buy his wife flowers or chocolate. So he put in some orders, and he told us what his wife liked. And the hospice team bought red roses, and I got a chocolate cake. I mean, we got things that his wife liked, and we had an anniversary celebration with them, which was very powerful. And he probably died a week after that, but he
Wow.
wanted to reach that particular milestone. An issue that is very complex. Often people want to fly back to their home country and die there.
Mm.
And so putting somebody on hospice on an airplane when they're not well is a really hard decision to make. It's a hard decision for our medical director. I imagine at the airport, we're like, what do we do with this person who's obviously declining? I'm thinking of one man who just wanted to die in Guatemala, where he was born and where many of his family members lived. And in the end, he might even have died on the plane. But what was most important to him was that he wanted to move in that direction with every last breath that he had. And his family was willing to help him get there.
Wow.
And it was pretty iffy, but he got on that airplane, and that's what mattered to him. And I think then he was able to let go. And I
Wow.
think he wanted his body there and not here. So that was able to happen.
I'm a pastor, and I've definitely had many experiences in sick rooms, both in the hospital wards, as well as in people's homes, nursing facilities. But in terms of attending on a regular basis to those on hospice, they're not many, but because of that, they are meaningful. One in particular, one of my former church members, or a member at a church I used to pastor, her father was on hospice. I had always, and I'm sure you encountered this a lot, I always believed or was under the impression that when somebody's placed on hospice, it's a few days. I didn't know that the length of time can vary. So this was my first encounter where I went to the home and I was really expecting an unresponsive or non-responsive person, but he was sitting at the table eating. And I said, in my mind, I didn't say this out loud. I said, okay, I wasn't expecting this picture. So, we had a lively conversation. There was a time where his health seemed to be increasing or improving, and he would come back to church, come back to some of the midweek noonday services, and then it kind of declined again. And on that second decline, we were at her home. He had moved in with his daughter and his daughter's family. And she said, Pastor, can you come by and just say a prayer for us? This might be the last time that we're all together as a family in this way. And she was in subtle ways trying to say to me, we don't know how much longer we have with him, and we want to have this moment together. I didn't have a script, I didn't know how to go about this. So the family's there, there's this felt emotional atmosphere, which is understandable. And so I felt impressed to go around the room or open up the floor for this activity. Let's go around the room, and I want you to say just a few words to him, whether he's your father-in-law, your grandfather, your uncle, or just a friend. And at the end, say, I love you, mention his name, and I appreciate you. So that's how we did it. And one by one. Julie, when I say there was not a dry eye in the room. And at the end, this stately patriarch of the family is just sitting there receiving it. And then he ended off by just going to like his family and just speaking words to them of charge and challenge. And I'm trying to keep it together, but I mean, that was too much for me, but it was a powerful moment. And it caused me to really appreciate, again, having those moments, not just when persons are on hospice, but at all times. I share that story to say, you have been in attendance to the dying and the families of the dying. As you reflect on your own life, what has that done for you in terms of how you live life? I hope that makes sense. Based on your work with the dying, how has that informed and influenced your living?
Right. I don't hold back. I try to live very fully. I try to tell the stories in the moment. I don't hold back on the I love yous and the expressions. If I have a compliment to give somebody, I've got to share it. There's kind of an urgency to my life. With my family and my children, I'm very affectionate, very physically affectionate. My son said to me the other day, and he's 14, he's like, Mom, aren't you tired of me? No, I'm never going to be tired of you.
Oh man, that's great.
Because something that occurs to me when you shared your kind of hospice storytelling prayerful scene is family members have always said to me, it's just not right that we have a funeral after somebody has died, because
Wow.
all these beautiful stories and memories and music happen and the loved one has died and they're not appreciating it or receiving it in the way that they would like. So that ritual that you shared is a lot of what I have done in hospice work, because while somebody is still living, you want them to have an opportunity to hear those stories and to remember and to participate in it. So this notion of a living wake is kind of what I call it.
Okay.
When somebody is declining, but well, whether or not they can visibly respond or not, I still believe they hear everything. But I think when somebody is still able to interact a little bit, it's an ideal time for family to gather around and have this experience of storytelling and music and sharing. And many stories begin with, Dad, I never told you, but I think in answer to your question, I would like to not begin my stories with, I've never told you, but I want to tell now, and I
Yes.
want to keep those stories alive now.
You said something once, Julie, and it was that in your view, hospice is not helping people die, but rather live. I remember you said that, and that was very profound to me. And I think that's what you just illustrated to us, that even in a dying moment or dying hours or seasons, it's still an attempt to come alongside to help that person, those persons, their families live in this moment, right? Don't allow fear of the unknown or the future that is life after this person to cause you to miss out on the moments that you have with it. There was an opportunity we had to similar situation, except for this gentleman, he was not responsive as much. His wife, they'd been married over 50 years, and she said, bring him home. He will be in the house. And every morning she would go to him and call his name, and she would ask this same question: how are you today? How are you today? Sometimes he would respond with just gentle movements. He would open his eyes, and then every now and then he'd actually say something. And so she began to record his statements. And after a while, during his hospice care, she had pages of statements. And there was one that was on the front of his memorial service program. And one of those statements, one morning when she asked, how are you today? His response was, my faith is undiminished.
Whew. Wow.
Can you imagine? Here he is on hospice. His words are few, his breaths are labored. And yet she asks this question every morning. There's no guarantee that she'll receive an audible response. It is just for him to hear her, if nothing else. But one morning he says, my faith is undiminished. If she had not lived in that moment, she might have missed the opportunity to record such powerful end of life statements. What are some end of life statements you've heard in your work that have been powerful, meaningful to you, that in some way you might hold on to?
Wow. Well, first, I want to add on to your story. Often when somebody has declined and they're not consistently responsive, or they can't offer more than a word or two, if that, family members dismiss them and treat them as though they've already died. You know, sometimes I'll call those homes. They'll say, "Oh, chaplain, we don't need you to come. They're not answering anymore." But I just have never believed that's true. There's still a human being in there, and they can still hear. And every now and then, it's like somebody lifts up the window shade, and you get this light, and you get to hear this profound statement from that person.
Yeah.
So I treat everybody like they're still very much alive, however they are responding or not. The first story that's coming to my mind about end of life statements is a woman who had Alzheimer's for years and years, and she was a ballet dancer. And what she was still doing right up until days before she died was she was pointing her toes, and forgive me because I don't know all the ballet positions, but she was doing these ballet exercises with her feet, sort of moving from first position and back, and doing these sort of leg cross exercises that come right out of like ballet warm-ups, number one. Number two, she hadn't said a word in months and months. And I always prayed with her, and I always asked her if she would like prayer. And I said the Lord's Prayer at the end of my prayer, and she said it, the entire thing. And she hadn't said a word in months. But that prayer was embedded in her, and for whatever reason, it came out in that moment. And from what I understand about Alzheimer's, the parts of our brain associated with music, prayer, and our faith experience are some of the last parts of the brain to deteriorate, as well as the parts of the brain associated with smell and some sort of tactile experience. So sometimes somebody won't remember what they had for breakfast. They might not remember their own children, but they can remember to sing a hymn from 1930 because that's deep inside them. And that's always so powerful when somebody comes out with some kind of expression like that, especially if you haven't heard it for such a long time. But the story that is coming to my mind was actually very important for me personally. There was a hospice patient who I was very connected with. She was a younger woman with breast cancer, and she had been on hospice for months, so I got to know her very well. I was probably 36 or 37 weeks pregnant with my second child, and I went to her to say goodbye because I was about to go on maternity leave. And she was barely responsive, but I knew she could hear me. And I held her hand. She was able to grasp my hand. And I said goodbye to her after I said a prayer. And she reached out her hand and she put it on my belly. And my baby, who was in there, who turned out to be my daughter, I didn't even know the gender yet, started moving around. Like my baby responded to her hand on my belly, and she was really weak. So it was such a subtle, gentle touch, like maybe only touching my shirt, barely even the skin through it. The baby moved around. It was incredible. I said goodbye to her. I walked out of the room. I walked down the stairs. I got to my car, and her son called me. And he said, she's gone. She passed. And it was such an incredible thing because her last gesture, one of her last gestures was touching my pregnant belly. But it doesn't end there. My daughter ended up being born on her birthday, weeks after the due date. And I had a dream about her the day after my daughter was born. And she came to me in a dream and she was dancing in a chapel. And it was beautiful and powerful. And I felt so connected to her spirit, almost as though she was passing something on to my baby. So that was a strong personal connection
Sure.
to me. And she is a hospice patient I will never forget.
As I've heard you over the past several months, as we have been pursuing our doctorates together and as you've been exploring your research, I can imagine that these are just a few of the many stories that you have, but these are so powerful, so poignant, and really, again, sensitize us to the nature of your work and many of the life lessons and principles that you can glean from them and personal experiences. As you were sharing that story, I could only imagine this young lady. I can imagine maybe you all were not far in age at the time too. So there was maybe all that at work. And her just having the presence to, connect with your belly, which in a visible way signifies new life.
Yeah.
You know, so there are a lot of nuances there. I want to ask you, one of the things we've been learning about together is learning across difference.
Mm-hmm.
From our first class, 901, we sat around that squared table configuration, and it was clear because each one of us represented a different faith tradition, a different denomination, and our work was situated in different communities. That's not new for you. Interfaith work, that is something that you are very used to. And I think sometimes when it comes to dying and when it comes to death, beliefs and nuances and views can come up. And then there's also mystery. People don't have a position. I simply want to ask you, how have you approached doing what you do across difference? And when I say difference, that's a broad word. So you can approach it by religious difference. You're a United Churches of Christ pastor, but I would assume that that's not the only community that you have ministered to. But then also cultural difference, ethnic difference, gender difference. Have you encountered opposition? Has anyone ever said, no, I don't want you to attend to me for any reason? How have you approached ministering across difference?
I think about myself as an improvisational actor more than anything else, especially when you're in somebody's home. I walk in and I try to have zero assumptions and I just work with whatever I've got. I can't, when it comes to death, I can't ever make any assumptions on what a particular religion or ethnicity or culture or class is going to believe about that dying process. It's just so individual and so unique. So I just walk into the home and I observe really fast and I ask questions because I don't know if I might ask if somebody wants a prayer, but well, I say, how would you like me to pray? What words do you use for the divine? What would you like me to pray for today? Does your mother like to be touched? Do you like to tell stories in your family? Wow, I noticed there's some books of photographs over there. Let's sit down and look at them. I do a lot of gathering and asking. And I'm mostly awestruck at how much people trust me. I really just have to say, hi, I'm Julie, the chaplain. And I feel like they hand me their life. But you're right, not always. There are many people, of course, who have been hurt by religion and have been hurt by clergy and don't trust it. And that can play out in a number of ways. I have sat in a room and had people give me a very angry expression of how they have been hurt by a pastor or a priest. And I feel like the best thing I can do is just to listen.
Wow.
A lot of people have been hurt. And it might have been something they never told anybody that happened 40 years ago. But this is their time to share. And there I am in their living room. And they're going to tell this clergy how much they don't trust any clergy, even though they're telling me their whole story. And I just stay there and I listen. Other people don't trust institutional religion, and many people identify as spiritual, not religious, and that's fine. I say, well, let's just define spirituality as whatever gives you life. And people will often say, well, I'm not really spiritual. And then they launch into a whole spiel about some incredible experience that happened on a mountaintop, or a dream they had, or a scripture they read that changed their life. I think we're spiritual people, but not everybody recognizes it or knows how to talk about it. Especially in New England, in this frozen chosen area, faith is very private. And we don't always talk about our experiences of the holy or find validation for them. So I just try to go in wide open as an improv actor and work with whatever I've got.
I'm so glad that you shared that, because I think it's helpful, not just to those who are hospice workers and not only to pastors or any other maybe more formal religious or spiritual leaders, but I think just in terms of human interaction, there can often be a lack of know-how when it comes to ministering to grieving. Let's just locate it in the area of friendship. Sometimes if a friend has a parent or another loved one who is experiencing terminal illness or they're dying, at times there can be this absence of words, which isn't always bad. Sometimes having nothing to say is okay. So I appreciate your emphasis on listening, on gathering information, not feeling inclined to impose your views or positions on other people, especially at this time. That's helpful, not only in a theoretical way, but I think even practically. Now, I'll be the first to admit that because a large part of our work, as you know, you've graduated from Harvard and we're at BU together, we can often have no shortage of words. We specialize in an economy of words, as it were. And so the emphasis on listening can often be very challenging. So I appreciate you telling us that. I want to kind of take a few steps away from hospice for a moment. We'll come back to it. Some of our ending questions will touch on it, but you went to an all women's institution for your undergraduate work, Mount Holyoke. 50 College Street, I believe is the address. I think I have that
Yes.
right. And you've referenced how instrumental that experience was in your younger life in developing you into a woman of strength, that there was something very unique, very edifying about coming out of your dorm every day. And it's just, I'm surrounded by women just like me. We're all growing. We all have dreams, aspirations. We're discovering ourselves. And one of your takeaways upon graduation was, this has given me the capacity to be a woman of strength. So many years later, since graduation, you're a wife, you're a mother, you have been living into your vocation. What for you now, at the time of this recording, it's 2020, gives you strength? And what are some of your sources for sustaining that strength? Do you still identify as a woman of strength? And if so, what are those sources and what do you do? How do you replenish that in your life?
Thank you. I think being in an all women's community gave me the imagination to step into whatever I wanted to. I saw women growing and being and emerging and manifesting in all kinds of ways, and it was wonderful. I don't think I would have gotten quite that view in a co-ed situation. And I was a painfully shy child and tween and awkward. So I think, I mean, one of my friends said to me, "Wow, it's like you came out of your wrappings and you really became whole." That's how it has always felt to me. I think being in an all women's space allowed me to think critically about the society I was in, and it gave me the imagination to place myself in situations I might not have been in before. Having said that, it's still, I don't know what could have prepared me for ministering and mothering simultaneously. It's hard. And I don't know any woman who's trying to have a purpose and work and juggle it all that feels like she's doing it really well. I still think, so maybe there is a need for a women's community or different kinds of communities throughout our life so we can still have that confidence and strength that we return back to, because we change again and again and again with every life stage. I mean, I don't think when I was 20 years old, I would have understood what it would feel like to have a bunch of babies and, and to know how to manage, my big dreams and topple patriarchy and change the world, but
Mm.
still have these three human beings dependent on me for their survival. Those are a lot of different directions to be pulled in at once. I mean, I couldn't have understood that now, but it's a question of maybe pacing ourselves and finally elevating motherhood or valuing motherhood or parenthood for what it is. Raising human beings is a valuable gift and art in its own way. And I still don't think as a culture that we value the role of parents and we value what it is to raise healthy, conscious, connected, spiritual children. I mean, there's nothing wrong with having that be our main focus or a big focus.
I know personally of friends and family members who are trying to let's just say they're new to that, where I have dreams, aspirations personally, professionally, and I'm also a parent. Many of them are new parents. That's kind of the season of life I'm in, where my peers are new parents. And so I was having a conversation recently with one of them, and they were just kind of emoting in a very expressive way, just the uncertainty of what to do. Do I follow my dreams? But I don't want to neglect my responsibilities as a parent. And I'm not a parent yet, so I could only just listen and sympathize with that challenge. So I appreciate you sharing from a personal experience. As an extension of what you've shared, you have 3 children and 2 boys, 1 daughter, right?
Mm-hmm.
Let's use this next question as maybe kind of a conversational time capsule.
Okay.
That if your daughter were to listen to this moment over and over again over the next 2 decades, 3, 4, 5 decades even, what are you trying to instill into your daughter? Now, this is not to neglect or disregard your sons, but I want to talk about mom and daughter. What values are you trying to instill in her as you reflect on your life? You said, I was a young, shy child, tween. I firmly believe that parents see in their own children things that the children don't see in themselves. So as you have watched your daughter and as she is growing and developing, let's put it like this. What are some strengths that you are seeing in your daughter that you admire? And what are some values that you are seeking to instill in her? What are your hopes and dreams for her?
Thank you. My daughter is the artist, the free spirit, the animal lover. She's wildly creative, and I never want that to be squashed. I want her to be unbound and be able to live into that fully. What she tells me right now at age 12 is that her biggest dream in life is to own a big horse farm in New Hampshire with acres and acres of land and just take care of horses all day, all night. And I don't want her to ever forget that dream. I want her to hold on to it. As an adult, I'm like, wow, it's really hard to own a farm and take care of a lot of horses. But I want her to hold on to that. I just picked her up in Vermont from a riding camp, and to see her in the mountains riding horses, and she showed me all these videos of herself cantering on this white horse across fields with a big space around it. I want her to have that, and I want her to have that feeling with everything that she does in her life, because that's her big, open, wild space and imagination. That's what I want her to have. And I think there are a lot of forces from society that come in and try to sometimes compress that or obscure it.
That's awesome. And I do hope that she has a chance to hear you say that, not just from the podcast. I'm sure you're already having very meaningful conversations. If just what little I know about you, based on our friendship and our collegiality within our cohort, I can only imagine how much of yourself your children and your husband have a chance to get of you. Not every child and not every couple has as their lived experience. My mom helps people who are dying. My wife attends to the dying. How is their experience with what you do?
It's a total mixed bag. Um, as little kids, I think they really struggled with it in some ways. My husband is Greek Orthodox, so they have experience with 2 different kinds of faith communities, and they tended to go to worship with him and not with me. My oldest son said when he was like 5 or 6 years old, he said, "Mom, when we go to the Greek Orthodox church, we have a really great time with Dad. When we go to church with you, we just watch lots of people lining up to talk to you." And so there was, there's that perspective. They've said to me, people just call you a lot. They just want to talk. Having said that, they have also had an incredible multi-generational community of people in their life. I served a church for 8 years in Southborough, and they got to know all kinds of people. And I homeschooled them for during part of that time, and they got to know all kinds of grown-ups, people that we normally wouldn't know, and people of different ages. And that has been exciting for them, and I think that shaped them. I don't think they necessarily realize that right now, but it
Sure.
has. At this stage, now that they're middle school, high school, they're asking all the hard questions, and they're rebelling and saying, like, they'll just say, "I don't even know if I believe in God, Mom." And I said, "All right, what do you think? What do you believe?" So we are having a lot of theological debate and discourse at our house all the time as they are rebelling and trying to separate from me, and then they kind of circle back. They're trying to find their place, and they've had exposure to progressive United Church of Christ congregations. They've been to Greek Orthodox churches. They've been dragged along to plenty of funerals. They've done mission work. They've had all kinds of faith experiences, and they're trying to find their way in it. And what I always say to them is, at the end of the day, I'm not wedded to you going to any particular kind of church or faith experience. I just want you to continue to have a relationship with God, and whatever you think that is, and have us be on a spiritual journey and continue to engage in your faith. And just keep asking the questions and live into those questions. Keep asking them and keep asking the next round, and don't stop doing that. I just want you to keep growing in your faith. And that's sort of where we're at right now. Is it easy? No, but they're not always obedient and silent. They have a lot to say, and they're wondering about the world. And my kitchen table is a place where those questions come out.
Awesome. That sounds like a book title, My Kitchen Table. I don't know. I feel like there's room there. Let me ask you this, Julie. How do you deal with secondary stress? How do you decompress? You are a worker right in the context where there's high emotions, a lot of feeling. So if you have ever experienced secondary trauma stress, traumatic stress, or secondary stress of any kind, how do you decompress after a day's work?
Well, there is the long distance running, there's the yoga, and I do all the normal things. I sleep well, I go to bed early, I wake up early. I'm pretty militant and even a little bit snobby about the food that I eat. I have a really healthy diet. And one of the benefits of having children is they distract you far from your work. So there's a lot of time to play. This summer, we've declared every Wednesday a beach day. So tomorrow, we're going to get up at 7 o'clock, pack up the van, and we're going to Crane Beach for the whole day. And there's really not cell phone reception there. So I'm with my kids and I'm on the beach. So I'm trying to use family life as a way to balance my work life. I'm also not afraid to turn off my phone. I have all these like do not disturb features on it. So at 8 o'clock at night, it's done and it doesn't turn on again until 8 o'clock the next day.
Right. That's phenomenal. I think that helps me, and I'm sure it's helping those of us who are listening who may find it challenging to, I mean, that's the age-old question, right? How do you balance work and life? I recently heard a friend of mine say that for her, the word is not so much balance, it's harmonize. I thought that was an interesting nuance, that in her view, it's challenging to really balance it, but there's a way to develop and work towards a harmony in which you are providing meaningfully to your work, to your family, to yourself, and don't have to feel that you're neglecting one for the other. Julie, we really just have two more questions that we'd like to raise. The first of the last two is this. Can you tell us in one sentence the subject of your doctoral research?
Oh, pressure. Okay. I am aspiring to create an experience of dignified, holistic death for all people, pandemic or not, a way for people to feel prayerfully held, period. Is that one sentence? That's one sentence.
I think that's one sentence. The reason why we are laughing right now with each other is because that is where we are in our doctoral journey, where our instructor has been emphasizing and pushing us to develop that one sentence. What is the problem? What is the ideal? And what's the last question, Julie?
What is the bridge to get there?
That's right. That's where we are. We will finish this program together. Here's our final question, Julie, and I've been richly inspired and edified by our conversation together. There's so many different avenues that we haven't explored, but thus is the living room. You don't have to talk about everything in order to have gleaned something meaningful for life. Here's our final question for you. I want you to think about the future now.
Hmm.
What is the line, Line, what is the line included in your obituary that people will read,
Okay.
or in the eulogy that will be spoken, that would have made the life you lived worth living?
That she helped people feel seen and heard and loved.
Thank you, Pastor Julie Cedrone, for allowing us to spend this quality time together in the living room. Thank you for inviting us into your life and your work. I hope that those who are listening have a more positive view on life. And if anyone was feeling fearful about their mortality, or if anyone listening is in a situation in your own family where there's someone who is dying, we hope that you have gleaned some measure of hope from this conversation. I won't even attempt to recap all the jewels that we've gleaned. There have been some nuggets that have been shared in this conversation that I think that we will glean from as we go forward. Julie, for those persons who might want to follow you, I'm not sure if you maintain a social media presence or if there's a direction you want to send them to. You mentioned something earlier, if they want to continue learning about what you do, maybe there's someone who's interested in hospice care, how can they contact you? How can they keep up with you?
I think people can go to my Facebook page. If I'm pretty easy to find on Facebook, people can send me a message there. I think at the moment that's the easiest and safe way. I'm developing my social media platform further,
All right.
but with Facebook. And the only thing I'll add, Richard, is I want to invite you to my living room now. I want to turn the table, so we'll figure that out next.
I would love to be a part of those kitchen table conversations, to hang out with you and your family, to be able to barbecue. There's actually something that you were supposed to cook for the cohort. Do you remember what that was? There was, I think, a Greek dish that you referenced.
Yeah, I know. I don't remember.
Well, anyways, we'll have to chow down on some of that at the kitchen table.
Okay, so you have a living room and I'm gonna have a kitchen table.
Yeah, and we'll have a conversation. I'll bring my wife, you grab the kids and everybody, the hubby, and we'll just go at it and have, hopefully a bonding experience as we converse together. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you so much.
Listen, everybody, that's all we have for this episode. We appreciate you all for joining us in the living room, where we listen, that we might learn and take what we learn into our lives. Hope you subscribe to the channel, share this with friends and family, give us some feedback. Let us know what your experience was like. Until then, my name is Richard Martin. Thank you to our special guest, Pastor Julie Cedrone. We'll see you next time.